Bob asked me to come and talk about deer management, both in forested areas and in residential areas. And this area is not unique. There are plenty of places where the same situation occurs. Lots of deer in the forest come into the residential areas and cause all kinds of problems, always because too many deer. So I'm drawing on experiences I've had with those folks, and hopefully I can make some sense for you. Before I really get into it, I'd like to review what my father, the best lesson he ever gave me was a philosophical basis for resolving conflicts. And he had three choices. He said, one was get out of the situation, leave, avoid the conflict. Well, nobody here is going to leave Hanover. We left 3 different towns because there were situations we could do that. But I don't expect anybody here is going to use that as a solution for conflict resolution. Another thing is accept the situation. You know, it is what it is. Make the best of it. Third one is change the situation by taking action. And that's what I'm going to promote tonight, although I'm going to talk about things to do just to keep status quo. Now, you're all familiar with a bunch of things I'm going to talk about. You know about deer impact on forest resources. You know about changes in vegetation and structure because of too many deer. You know the relationship between deer and ticks, Lyme disease, probably aware of factors for controlling deer density, deer impact, and management strategies for reducing deer. But I'm going to go through them briefly, just to give me a basis for the rest of my talk. I worked in forests for 2 or 3 decades, and forests go through a series of successional stages, and each of those provides critical habitat for a specific wildlife component. The first one is early succession, where there's been some sort of disturbance and the overstory trees are removed. You get this low, shrubby, wildflower sort of forest composition. That progresses to a brushy stage where you have shrubs going up and tree seedlings coming up. That progresses to a sapling pole stage where now the trees are 20 or 30 feet high, that big around. Not much in the understory, but good hiding cover. That progresses to a mature forest, which provides all kinds of structure and vegetation, low vegetation, shrub vegetation, mid-story, and overstory. So it's really a cornucopia of habitat for wildlife. And then finally, if it's allowed, those stands go to the old growth stage, where you have much different structure. You have very tall trees, very big trees, lots of down wood, lots of openings, all kinds of different things going on, but it all provides forage and habitat for wildlife. This system is optimized when deer density is 10 deer per square mile or less. So let's look at what happened pre-colonial times when there were the correct number of deer in the environment. 6 to 10 deer per square mile. There was a dense understory vegetation, shrubs and forbs, lots of structure. There was a diverse and abundant wildlife species component because all of their habitat requirements were there. Lots of wildflowers and shrubs. Diverse and abundant number and species of tree seedlings. If something happened to cause the overstory to come down, it would be replaced by seedlings, same species. And the deer were healthy, good fawn survival, and the deer had good racks for people who are interested. Well, things over time developed the country, and deer density got higher as a result of some things I'll talk about. But once you get above 10, you get in the 10 to 40 deer per square mile, you begin to lose certain characteristics of habitat and wildlife species. Species richness and abundance of wildflowers and shrubs and seedlings decline. In some cases, they're eliminated. Structure and diversity of the understory and midstory is gone. So it's hard for animals that used to have that kind of a structure to make a living. The abundance and species richness of wildlife species overall declines, and deer body weight and antler characteristics and health and winter survival declines. This is pretty much where we are in a lot of the forests today. If you get above 40 deer per square mile, pretty much everything goes. your wildflowers, your shrubs, a lot of the bird and other wildlife species. You have the understory that goes from seedlings and forbs, wildflowers to shrubs and exotic species, such as honeysuckle, barberry, or garlic mustard. You have a definite shrub line or a rouse line. And fawn production pretty much ceases. They can't produce fawns, or if they do, they succumb to starvation and they can't make it to winter. So you start to have massive deer die-offs. This is a picture of a farm in lower central Michigan. I was there a few years ago. Person had a problem with deer eating his corn. His corn went to ethanol plants. So this is a picture he showed me of his cornfield. There's 100 deer in that cornfield. And bad enough on the corn, but if you go in the understory of the surrounding forest, there's nothing there except garlic mustard. And the deer ate everything else. They also impact, as I earlier said, their condition and health by altering the composition and abundance of forage. At 6 to 10 deer per square mile, you have healthy deer. Nice big racks for the hunters. Fawn survival. At 10 to 40 deer per square mile, where we are pretty much now, you have limited amounts of forage. The deer aren't that big, and their racks are smaller. I know this because we have conducted check stations to a variety of deer densities. And the fewer deer there are, the bigger and better they are. Once you get to 40 plus deer per square mile, they've eaten up everything that they can. And if there's no adjacent landscape with forage, you have these massive deer starvation die-offs. We switch to landscapes, residential landscapes. The problems there are there's heavy browsing on ornamentals and shrubs, transmission of Lyme and other diseases by deer ticks, deer vehicle accidents, damage to homes. About 3 months ago, a deer ran across the road, ran up to our condominium, or our townhouse, and jumped through my window, double pane glass window. It thought it saw a way out, and my wife heard the explosion in the basement, went down, opened the door, and out came the deer. So fortunately, it wasn't damaged, just a little bloody nose, and it somehow managed to avoid all of our antiques. But they cause problems. Our daughter had a dog, and fawn was born to a doe every year in her backyard in suburban Cincinnati. One day she let the dog out, didn't see the deer. The deer saw the dog and just stomped it into the ground, checking its fawn. Dog never went outside again. And you can get transmission of parasites in dogs that love to eat deer food. So he moves to one of our many moves to a large house in Tennessee in a forested community like this one. And in the fall, I noticed that people were wrapping their trees, shrubs in burlap. And I said, why are they doing this? It doesn't get that cold. Well, I quickly found out that if you didn't do that, your azalea bushes were wiped out. I bought my wife a Rose of Sharon tree that died because there was nothing left of it. So it can be a problem. So we're dealing with two situations here. We're dealing with the forest and all the things that deer can affect at different densities. And then we're dealing with the residential area where the tolerance for deer is just about zero. Now, the father of American wildlife history, Aldo Leopold, once said, deer management is people management. And he was right. You really have to be looking at what people want, what they're going to tolerate, and try and manage deer on that basis. You just hope that some of them have the idea. But deer management then is influenced by the goals people have for natural resources. And are defined by different cultural values and issues. So we have different carrying capacities, and this curve demonstrates that. If you go across the bottom axis, you get deer density that increases, and as the curve line goes up, we begin to lose or reflect certain carrying capacities. At the very bottom, about 0 deer per square mile, that's a cultural carrying capacity for townships and residential areas like in Hanover. Don't want any deer. If you go up to about 10 deer per square mile, you're still at this carrying capacity for diversity. You'll have a diverse and abundant assemblage of wildlife species and their habitats. Once you get above 15 deer per square mile, you're talking about affecting regeneration of some trees. Some of them not so important to foresters. If you keep going up on the curve, around 20 or so deer per square mile, then you're having a point where seedlings that are important for logging and regeneration are pretty well wiped out. Almost nothing left. As you get up to about 30, 35 deer per square mile, that I'm calling that, what am I calling it? The only browsing and resistant seedlings, there's hardly anything left. And a little farther on the curve, we have carrying capacity for MSY, which is maximum sustained yield. That's the greatest number of deer you can maintain on a landscape. And in the past, that's the number hunters wanted to see. They wanted to go out and see 30 or 40 deer in a day, be able to open the door, step outside and shoot a deer. Unfortunately, that MSY, there's very little left for deer to eat. The tree seedlings of any kind are pretty much gone except for resistant species like beech and striped maple. The understory is characterized by the dense canopy of ferns and exotic plants. So this is really the pits. And it doesn't stay that way. As the deer continues to eat the forage, the carrying capacity numbers slide downward as the deer impact is greater with less and less forage. Finally, if you get on the other side, you get these massive starvation losses and deer die in large numbers, as happened in Pennsylvania in the late 30s. So we're going to talk about two different carrying capacities here that we're going to address. For forest diversity and health, the requirement is for deer density of about 8 to 25 deer per square mile, depending on your goals. For forested residential communities like this one, cultural carrying capacity is close to zero. We have to try and manage for both of those at the same time. If we look at this cultural carrying capacity curve, we want to see where Hanover is. It's that little circle with the H in it. From the information I got, it looks to me as though there are about 35 to 40 deer per square mile in the forest surrounding the residential areas. Can't say what it is in the residential areas, but obviously it's too high. There was a survey done by foresters recently where they found no hemlock seedlings, only beech, a few white pines, maple seedlings. Everything else was gone, replaced by exotic shrubs. If you looked at the residential area, these two pictures reflect that. Everything was covered with netting to protect it from deer. So we have two carrying capacities. The one for residents is way down around 8, but they're way above that. And the one for forest is right at destruction of pretty much everything. So we come to this map, a DMAP area that I was sent, and the red area kind of reflects where the houses are. It's a red zone with a deer causing impacts, and the other area in the middle is forest. So how many deer are there actually? And I took the estimated density per square mile, which I said is 35, times the square miles of the area, which is 6.3, to come up with 220 deer. Let's see what that turns out to be. Residential areas located right adjacent to the forested areas. That causes a lot of problems. The residential area has limited wildlife habitat. The forested areas can have that full complement if their density is down around the 10 deer per square mile. Wildlife can move between two areas. Cultural carrying capacities are different, as I've identified, and deer management really has to be different for the two areas. About 20 years ago, I went to a similar situation in Westchester County. The area in white represents Ward Pound Ridge Reservations of County Park, all forest. And the area outside is all ringed with residences. And it doesn't show here. We'll come back to that. The people were complaining because they could not maintain any kind of vegetation. It's the first place I've ever been where everybody's home was protected by a deer fence. Now, these people had money, so they could do that. Inside the park, there were so many deer that there was no understory. So deer basically were hanging out in the park at night, during the daytime, going into the residential areas at night and feeding. Turn that picture of that map on its side. We did a number of transects to estimate how many deer were in that particular part. We used the deer population count. Right on the basis of the adjacent area, there's about 93 deer per square mile. If you went 1,000 feet in, there's 104 deer per square mile. Then as you got farther in, the numbers declined. Most of the deer were hanging out adjacent to the area and going in and causing their damage. I thought that was the situation here. I don't think it is, and we'll get into that. When I went out and looked at some of these places, there would be residential areas, and then there would be like a little inclusion of forested area inside or adjacent. And it seemed like the deer were hanging out there, kind of like permanent residents. And it wasn't so much the deer were coming from that large forested area, but they were already there. So if we want to manage deer, we need to look at why there are so many. Why is it important to know that? Deer exhibit what's called a K-selected characteristics. They have a low reproductive rate, produce a small number of offspring, high parental investments. They care their young until they get big enough to do it on their own. Long lifetime. These organisms tend to live years, not months. High offspring survival. They take good care. They only have a few, but a lot of them make it. The numbers are only controlled by outside predation or disease or parasites or weather. Primarily, what controlled deer before we mucked up the system was predators, mountain lions, wolves, bears, and American natives. So deer density wasn't balanced with the environment at about 5 to 10 deer per square mile. Researchers from 20 or 30 years ago made some estimates, and they figured that Native Americans took about 2 deer per square mile. Other predators, wolves, mountain lions, so forth, took another 2. Severe weather, forage scarcity would take a couple. But the mortality factors removed by deer, recruited by deer, I'm not saying it right. Those 4 deer that were removed by predators represented recruitment. So population of 10 deer per square mile might have 40% recruitment. So the only thing to keep that stable is to remove the number of deer in the recruitment rate. Not removing all fawns, but they're removing enough fawns and adults. So mortality equals recruitment. This graph shows what happened kind of in the distant past. Around 1500, when the country was becoming developed, people started to clear land for fencing, for wildlife, for farming and wildlife. And Native Americans were on the decline. People were taking the reservations and they were eliminating wolves, mountain lions. The timber harvest started to increase about 1800 or so. You got to the late 1900s, late 1800s actually, and that's when market hunting started. And it was uncontrolled harvest of deer, and the deer populations plummeted almost to zero. Some states had basically no deer, and they had to get deer imported from other states. So we have rapid ups and downs depending on predation previously. This graph shows the boom and bust cycle of deer density timber harvest in the 20th century. At the bottom, the deer had plateaued out. But at the same time, forest harvest increased to the point that total harvest, the total state was clear cut, creating vast amounts of deer forage. At the same time, there was heavy restrictions on deer harvest. So no predation, lots of forage, deer population skyrocketed, reaching very high numbers, like about 50 deer per square mile in the late 30s, at which point there was a huge, massive deer starvation die-off, and the population dropped way down. At that point, they began to have even higher restrictions on deer hunting. So there's, again, low predation pressure. A second wave of forest harvest began. So same situation that happened earlier, lots of food, no predators. We got a second boom in deer numbers. After about 1970, 1980, the forest overstory closed, so there's less forage now. And the this is Pennsylvania, game division decided they really had to help out. So they made doe hunting legal, and after a while, they made it legal to hunt and harvest more than one doe. So that brought us to a fairly stable situation where there's between 30 and 35 deer per square mile. Still too much for the forest, still too much for wildlife and shrubs, but that's where we were. I think I went backwards. So in 27, a guy named Edwin George established the George Reserve, 1.8 square mile deer enclosure of forest and meadowlands to see how rapidly deer could increase. No predation, no hunting, lots of forage. And so the reserve deer herd increased from 4 does and 2 bucks in 1927 deer per square mile to 90 deer per square mile, like 6 years later. That's how fast they can increase. And if you look at the graph on your right, you have this exponential growth curve, which is typical of deer that are reduced from predation pressure, and they have all the forage they want. They just take off, no controls. So what happened? What did we learn from the George Reserve? That deer numbers aren't controlled by external factors. The predators that were eliminated, mountain lions, wolves, bears, and coyotes, subsistence hunting by American Indians, subsistence hunting by European colonists, recreation hunting wasn't allowed. That allowed the deer to greatly expand, especially with high food availability, mild weather, no parasites or diseases. So historically, predation by wildlife, Native Americans, livestock growers, subsistence and market hunters, weather and food controlled deer abundance and impact for a long time, at least in the 1800s. But now that Native Americans and most predators are gone, weather is milder, food abounds, residential shrubbery included, the only way to reduce deer abundance and associated impact is harvesting by humans. Can't do that in all places. So if we can't do that, we have to resort to exclusion. Two solutions for managing deer impact in forested residential areas and adjacent forest lands. One, if you can have landscape reduction of deer abundance, which I think that is best, or site protection against deer impact. I'm going to talk very briefly about things that don't work. A number of people have suggested reintroducing native predators, mountain lions and wolf. Doesn't work. First of all, they don't coexist with humans. They get run over by cars or they get shot. It just doesn't work. Coyotes have replaced wolves in the eastern United States, but coyotes only take small deer. They don't take large deer. So reintroducing native predators is not a possibility. What about chemosteroids? They developed this PCP that you could inject into a female deer. It would make her sterile. She couldn't have young for a year. But you had to go back and re-inoculate that deer subsequent year. So people spent a lot of money developing this system, and I have yet to see a place where it worked. In Irondequoit, in Rochester, Ontario Lake, they tried for years and it didn't work. There's a small area down at Hastings on Hudson called the Hillside Woods. It's about 100 acres adjacent to the school, and there was nothing on the ground. Even the beach was pretty much grazed into nothing. So I had a bunch of us come out there and tell them what to do. They had tried chemosteroids for 10 years and it hadn't worked. So basically we said, build a fence. They built a fence, enclosed about 100 acres. And so far, everything is doing well. The deer are outside the fence. Stuff that's protected is inside the fence. And you're getting survival and growth of the understory. So controlling of deer impact by reducing deer incidence can only be addressed by hunting under sharpshooting and not sharpshooting. Sharpshooting is a solution, but it has to be done every year. And there are issues with sharpshooting. So it's not going to be effective. So what solutions are available for protecting understory diversity, wildlife habitat, and large landscape forests? That would be the first thing to talk about. Excluding deer from access to seedlings, shrubs, and wildflowers using deer-proof fencing has been used in the past. Go to a site that's going to be clear cut, maybe 20 acres, and put a fence all around it. Then they harvest overstory trees, or thinning, to stimulate seedling growth. Once the seedlings get high enough, like 6 feet out of the reach of deer, they harvest the remaining overstory and take down the fence. Seedlings have escaped deer, everything works fine. But you have to put the fence up, you have to maintain it, and then there are issues where deer get inside the fence, and you have to get permission to go and shoot them, because 1 or 2 deer inside a fence like that will wipe everything out in a very short period of time. So that's one solution. I think the other and better solution is reducing deer abundance by hunting. Now, hunters' influence on Natural Resource Agency is really declining. Used to be they could argue for more deer, and there was a lot of restrictions on the amount of deer that were harvested. Not many antlers permits were given out. That's all changed now. So increasing deer harvest really holds a promise. And that's my solution number 3. My father said, change the situation. Taking some kind of action to affect the change you need. Just a couple of things about fences. This is an electric fence that surrounds a regeneration site. You can see that there are some things growing in the understory, but the fences go down. They get knocked down by windfall, or the electricity goes off. So they're not really a good solution. A more permanent solution and effective is you put a fence, a woven wire deer fence, all around the regeneration site with an apron so deer can't burrow under the fence. Now, they use that mostly for forested sites, but there was a family that developed a compound in Pennsylvania in the 1920s, the Glendorf family, the Howe family. They had lots of money. They bought up this 1,100 acre tract, put a deer fence all the way around it. This is the deer fence 80 years later, same fence. So they last. And if you see a deer is just trying to get out, couldn't make it. They put the apron on the wrong side, but this can work. It's just a very expensive solution that requires constant maintenance. Like I just said, it's expensive, damage to the fencing itself, but it works better for woven wire, better than electric. But it only protects the vegetation inside the fence. So foresters would notice that, hey, we got good seedling growth, we got wildflowers, we got shrubs. Everything outside the fence was decimated. In fact, it was even less because of what was removed by the fencing. So it only protects the seedlings, the understory inside the fence. When they take the fence away, they'll come in and take out the understory. So it works, but only for regeneration of commercially valuable trees. And occasionally deer will get inside the fences, and that's big problem to remove. You have to get permission from the resource agency, and then what do you do with the deer? So fencing has its drawbacks. There are other solutions for protecting tree seedlings. One is to put tubes around them. These tubes here were put around oak seedlings that were planted, staked to the seedlings, enclosed in the tube, and the deer can't touch them until they go out the top. But the problem is once you take the tube off and release the seedlings from the stakes, they fall over. They don't have any structural strength. So it's not a good solution. A solution that does work partially is when they harvest the site, and there are some seedlings, they'll cover all the seedlings with slash, which is what the spring pile is. That can work, but mostly loggers are under the gun to prevent damage on skid trails and creek bottoms. So they take the slash and cover their skid trails and creek bottoms with that instead. So it doesn't really do much. So what is our third solution? Taking corrective action. In the Menominee Indian Reservation, lead the way. They have very liberal hunting regulations, multiple permits issued for harvesting deer, a long deer season, buy-in by the residents in the tribe, cultural acceptance of liberalized hunting. The guiding philosophy is bringing deer into abundance, balance with all the other forest resources. I was there on the Indian Reservation in 1992, and it was incredible. The understory was lush, full of seedlings and shrubs, no issues. That solution worked for them, but it was people could shoot a lot of deer over a very long period of time, and they utilized them. So you can get sustainable harvest of trees, creating an understory for wildlife, and dilute the impact by greatly reducing deer. And that, I think, is a solution out in the forested area surrounding the residential areas, not inside. This is a picture of an area that I worked on for about 12 years called the Kinzua Cooperative Research Unit. I said that wrong. Kinzua Quality Deer, established by the Sand County Foundation in 2000. And they looked for an area that they could collaborate with a bunch of people like researchers, managers, hunters, and try to bring deer density down. The area in green is part of the Allegheny National Forest. You can see that there's very little openings, not much forage created. The area on the right side was a watershed and a private timber holdings, and they did a lot more harvesting. So those two areas created a lot more forage than the area on the left. If we look at the road system, which is access for hunters to hunt deer, we see that the Allegheny side on the left had a very diverse, extensive, well-maintained, and labeled deer road system. People could go in there with a map and they could find the deer, they could find their way out. The areas to the right had poor roads, not much road signage, and so access was poor. So they had less success harvesting deer in those areas than they did on the Allegheny National Forest. When we started the project, we wanted to monitor what was happening. So on a number of sites, each one of those little blue squares, we put in deer transect lines, mile long, 1,000 feet apart, and we monitored deer by counting deer pellet groups, and we monitored impact by measuring the level of impact on different forest seedling species. We did it on both areas. So monitoring was an integral part of this Kinzua Quality Deer Cooperative agenda. Measure deer density with pellet group counts every spring. Measure deer impact on vegetation on the same plots that we measured deer density. We measured deer herd composition every fall. We went out and basically determined how many adult does and bucks and fawns were running out there with roadside counts. And we had the physical characteristics of deer as we harvested them. They brought them to check stations, and we were able to measure by age class and sex how much they weighed, what kind of antler points they had, what their condition was. We also monitored for a while hunter satisfaction. So how did we do all this? Early on, we established a coordinated committee comprised of all stakeholders: hunters, foresters, residents, people involved in recreation. Everybody got involved was on the committee, landowners, so they could be involved with decision-making and recommendations. We monitored, established a monitoring system to get a baseline for deer density and impact. We determined, because we knew how many deer there were, we knew where we wanted to go, how many deer had to be removed, and we obtained a number of antlerless permits that we thought would do the job. Started up with 3,000. We used check stations to monitor harvest and to communicate with the hunters. They could come to the check stations. We had all kinds of information and maps that showed them where to go, where the high deer density was, and then also just to give them an idea of the composition and structure of the dirt where it was. They appreciated that. And finally, maintaining good road access. You saw that road system on the left side of the map. They plowed the roads in the winter when it got too snowy. They didn't, I think they did that in the other part, but it was important to keep roads open so hunters could have access. The thing worked. This graph shows the reduction in deer abundance, the red line, deer per square mile, with the increase in plots with no deer impact. So you can see that through the years, the population density went from about 28 down to about 10. That's where we wanted to be. It stayed there for a while, and the plots no deer impact remained high. Now there's a right end of this graph that I'll get to later, which is a caveat. But when we monitor the deer themselves, you see the line that goes down and shows the deer density. All the lines going from right to left are increases in body weight by adult bucks, the top line, young adults, dotted line, yearlings, lower down, and finally fawns. All age classes of deer increased in body weight. I don't have the slide to show you, but the antler characteristics were greatly improved. Number of points, antler beam diameter, antler spread, everything increased with deer because the forage availability was higher by reducing deer density. We didn't do a whole lot of looking at forbs like Trillium, but we did have a person on board every couple of years would go out, and as the deer density inclined, the height and length of various understory forbs increased. Myanthemum canadense, Myanthemum virginia, Trillium. So we can show that as deer density declined, the height, growth, and characteristics of these four species that were endangered improved. Now, on to the caveat. Here's that same graph that I showed just a while ago. Deer density declining, reduction in increase in plots with no damage, but then about 1913, 1914, they got a little cute and decided they would reduce the number of DMAP tags. Didn't need that many tags. And the deer responded by increasing. And we got a drop, a very large drop in plots, percent of plots with no impact. So you have to maintain the system, and you have to be aware of how many deer you need to remove and have the correct number of DMAP tags. It corrected that situation in 1922, where they had more tags out there, deer population again went down, and the percent plots with no impact increased. Now, the tags that we got to reduce deer density were two kinds. There was a larger management area, and they had a number of antlerless tags that were could be used on the Kinzua Quality Deer Cooperative. And then we had a number of DMAP tags exclusively for that. So the dotted line that goes down low, that's the number of DMAP tags that were issued.
What's a DMAP? What's a DMAP tag, Rory? What's DMAP stand for?
Oh, a Deer Management Assistance Program. The State Wildlife Agency issued tags to people to hunt, harvest antlerless deer. So we had this large increase at the beginning. The deer population declined, and they started to reduce the number of permits. I think that was a little premature. The upper dotted line was the number of antlerless tags provided by the management area surrounding. They maintained that fairly consistently. So in this case, DMAP helped, but when the DMAP tags got lower, deer population came up a little bit. It was kept in check by these antlerless tags by the surrounding area. The deer population increased a little bit, then it sharply went down in the late 20s, no, it's like 10, I guess, 11. At the same time, the number of antlerless tags increased in the area. So deer density is very sensitive to the number of tags that are issued, both area-wide and specific DMAP area tags. This shows the size of the two units. The unit that surrounded the KQDC area was very large, and the KQDC area itself was just up in a little corner. So much larger area to draw hunters from than just on the KQDC. Lots of benefits from managing deer abundance. Deer density and impact are reduced to desired levels if you do it right. Forest managers no longer had to fence regeneration sites. They could do it taking the overstory off. There would be enough seedlings that got away from deer. Shrub and wildflower species actually returned to the sites. They would see them again and report them. And the deer weight antler characteristics increased. And that made the hunters happy. Now that we had quality deer. But this little caveat, coordinating committee that made all the decisions on how many tags to issue must be current on their monitor. They have to really know how many deer they have, what kind of impact they have, and that guides them. And they didn't do it right, they reduced the number of tags, increase on the density of the population, and damage. So committee has to be very careful, monitor that stuff, and adjust on a yearly basis. So this slide says how enhanced public hunting helps reduce deer density. Because the Pennsylvania Game Commission provided enough permits to harvest antlerless deer. They also restricted the harvest of bucks, made it a 3-point regulation, so people were more apt to shoot antlerless deer. There was a little gift from the Game Commission. KQDC team mounted a very aggressive promotion campaign to attract hunters. We established a deer check station rate that we kept on so we could monitor the condition of the deer and the hunters could come and pretty much get involved. And we rewarded deer hunters. The first couple of years we had a banquet. And if you shot an antlerless deer, you got a ticket. You could come to the banquet. You had a great meal. You had a great talk. People talked about how many deer they harvested. And then there was a raffle at the end. They raffled off things like guns. So they were rewarded. They came. That all worked quite well. And in 5 years, the deer density dropped down to the acceptable levels for the ecosystem. Now, why did the KQDC work so well? It formed a coordinating committee comprised of all the stakeholders, homeowners, deer biologists from the Pennsylvania Game Commission, foresters and wildlife biologists from the Allegheny National Forest, extension foresters, local deer hunters, scientists from the National Forest and Penn State, and foresters and the cooperative landowners. All of these people made the decisions on how to manage the harvest, how to manage the deer. Hired a coordinator, met annually. The coordinating committee communicated with all stakeholders via the website, Facebook page, the blog, and they distributed annual reports to all hunters, made it available on the website, and included maps. When the hunters came and went to the website, they could get maps of the areas where the roads were, where the density was highest, locations of check stations, and harvest results. So they got the whole thing. Really kept them engaged, and I think that helped a lot. The committee cooperated with the Pennsylvania Game Commission to work the number of antlerless tags from the surrounding management unit and DMAP tags. So it's good cooperation, coordination between the two agencies. The deer condition and deer density and impact were monitored annually, and we used local hunters and local people. The hunters actually went out, counted deer in the fall, helped us with estimating deer density in the spring. Very helpful. The deer density impact and harvest results, like I say, were monitored annually, and we created an annual report that went to all interested parties, including all of the cooperators. Cooperating landowners assessed a fee to themselves to pay for the services of the coordinator, myself, and other people, so that the costs for doing the program were borne by all the stakeholders, well, most of them. And all the parties contributed and committed to long-term monitoring and adjusting of the harvest. This is not a one-off. This is something that has to go on forever to get it right. I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences between some of those areas. I mentioned that the road system was way more intense on the Allegheny National Forest than on the watershed and the private forest land. But also, timber harvest was way higher, sustainable on the watershed and the private forest land. So, poorer access, but more forage. What that meant was you could carry more deer on the two areas that had poor road access because there's more forage. And that's what happened. These three curves represent what I think was the situation. The upper curve represents the forest management for a high level of timber harvest, reproduction, seedlings, and creating a whole lot of forage. So the curve is at the highest point. You can actually have more deer at different cultural carrying capacities until you get way down to seedlings and shrubs and forbs, and then it's all pretty much the same. It collapses down. The middle line represents part of the forest on the other side, right side, left side of the graph, where they have limited forage creation, but a lot of access. So those two things kind of work together. The bottom graph shows what you might have with an oak growth forest, where you have little hunting, you don't have a whole lot of forage, not much access, and you're carrying a whole lot less deer at the same impact levels. So what would a recommendation be to reverse diversity on the forested area? I would say to mimic some form of the KQDC program, especially by establishing a communication system for all stakeholders. I think you have an existing website, but it could be expanded to provide more information to hunters, like where to go to hunt, where the access points are, what the harvest is like, how many deer. So the questions really that remain for harvesting as a method is how many deer do you harvest? How do you improve hunter efficiency? And how many DMAT tags and antlerless tags do you offer? Like I said, the estimated deer density on the forest there is about 35 deer per square mile for a total of about 220 deer. The estimated impact, as we saw from the slides, it's very heavy, no shrubs, wildflowers, very poor seedling reproduction, no browse. harvest statistics. About 150 hunters with 3 or maybe 5 DMAP tags each. Last year they harvested 33 deer. Projected recoupment of a herd of that size would be about 50 deer. So the harvest didn't quite keep track with recruitment.
Can I ask, how are you calculating that projected recruitment?
Hmm?
How are you calculating the projected recruitment?
Oh, I figured that on average, recruitment's about 25%. You take 25% up to 20 and you get 50. That's pretty standard recruitment. The harvest till now is removing slightly less than the recruitment. So the herd is maybe stable or maybe increasing, but not much of an improvement in deer density and impact. Need to harvest more deer to get density and impact down to the levels you want. How do you do that? This is, Becky gave me this information. You can see that the number of permits issued per year, the tags, the deer harvested, and the active number of deer harvested range from the almost 70 down to 40 or 50. So based on what I think is recruitment of that herd, just keeping track. You're not reducing the herd. The bottom left graph shows the number of tags that were actually filled. And that's really a good percent. Usually you get about 10%. So the hunters are being effective. It's just that there's not enough hunting effort. How do you increase that?
Can you just go back to the slide before? You're saying the hunters, can you go back to the slide before?
Try.
Mind.
How'd that go?
Yeah. So a typical hunter in this arrangement will have get 2 tags.
I think up to 5.
They're getting 3 now.
Three.
As of this year. As of this year, we changed it to 3.
And how many deer will a typical hunter actually manage to kill? They manage to do all 3 or not?
So this is the first year that we have 3 tags, so I don't know in
Right.
terms of that, but it's right up here. The percentage filling, let's see. So successful permittees, so about 33%. So I will say the deer harvested last year was 40. 33% was the percent of permittees that were successful. So in terms of people that filled 2 tags, there were only 8 people that filled 2 tags.
So if I get my tags, I'm required then to report when I've actually managed to kill a deer.
Correct.
That's how it works. Yeah.
Yes.
So the statistics are all there. Okay, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's one issue, is that, most people are only willing to harvest so many deer. And so you can issue more tags, but if you can't increase the number of hunters,
Yep.
giving those hunters more tags doesn't necessarily really increase your harvest very much, because a lot of people are just not interested in harvesting 3, 4, 5 deer.
Because what do they do with the meat and all that stuff? Yeah.
That is the conundrum.
And where are they actually allowed to hunt? And how long would it take out in the further out before the deletion of deer affects us in Hanover? Because I've got 7 in my yard.
Yeah, so the DMAP area is currently 4,000, just over 4,000 acres. And that's just the area where people can use these extra tags. So obviously everywhere else, they can use their regular tags, which can be their archery tags, their regular firearms tags. But I know, we've been talking with the deer committee about potentially expanding that area. So hopefully that can be done in the future. In terms of how long, I can't necessarily make that prediction.
Thank you.
Yeah.
You raise a really good point, and I think as a hunter, as we've discussed, David, there's a heterogeneous distribution of deer. And there's only certain areas where you can actually use the tags. And I was in an area last week, which was not a DMAP area. It was within meters of the DMAP area. I had an opportunity, but that would mean I couldn't hunt anymore off DMAP. So there's those choices there, that having these tags allows much more flexibility in how hunters can approach their season and actually be more effective and more efficient in harvesting.
So I'm guessing, so I'm trying to guess how this works, so that you get tags in one area and tags in a different area, or I don't understand the DMAP area.
The DMAP is a zone, but landowners in the zone have to opt into it. And I
Right.
think that's frankly misunderstood.
Right.
So you can only use the tags on land that landowners have opted into the program. And in time, we hope to expand the boundary, therefore the opportunity for landowners to opt in. We like the entire town of Hanover. And we've done some browse surveys and so forth. But I think the question is, how do we improve hunter efficiency?
Yeah.
How do we maintain the good experience of hunting without bringing hunters into conflict? And how do we maintain hunting as a viable thing in a rural urban interface? And not everyone's familiar with that activity here. So it's a thing, as David's saying, with a lot of stakeholders.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons for having this communication. And I don't want to.
Thank you. Sorry to have interrupted the flow.
So my estimated deer density is 35 per square mile for a total of 220. But the estimated impact from the photographs and the assessment of the foresters was very heavy. No shrubs, no wildflowers, only browse-resistant species. The hunter statistics that sort of go along with this, about 150 hunters. I think I've done this slide again. Right, I went the wrong way. Okay, so how do we improve hunter efficiency? I think that's a valuable question. And you want to reward successful hunters. Ward Pound Ridge had a system whereby if you harvested a deer, you could get a permit to come back and hunt again. If you didn't harvest a deer, after about 3 years of trying, you didn't get any more permits. So a system for rewarding successful, identifying and rewarding successful hunters so they get the maps. And they're the ones that are going to do the harvesting. How do you recruit additional hunters is a real problem, but it's critical. Problem now is kids don't hunt. They play on their computers. And the population of hunters is aging. We recorded the age of people that harvest deer on the KQDC or DC, and it crept up. Got fewer and fewer young people. We got more women, which was helpful. But that's a whole problem of recruiting new, sustaining hunters. How about improving the efficiency of hunters? Well, Allegheny does a good job by increasing and improving road access, plow the roads in the wintertime to clear the snow. And they maintain contact with the hunters. So they know what's going on, where to hunt, how the hunt has gone, how the deer have improved, and how the habitat is improving. Communication. We continued with a check station to monitor deer harvest, sex and age, and weight and antler characteristics, and the age of the deer, all which feed into making recommendations for future harvest and give more information to the hunters. If possible, and you could respond to this, establish some kind of a program with New Hampshire Game and Fish and Dartmouth or UNH for research and use students for monitoring. If you had a class like we did on the KQDC, we got students from Penn State to come and monitor the deer and run a check station. That was helpful. And they gained invaluable experience. And if you monitor the harvest between the seasons, if the harvest is too low, if you can do something to increase the harvest. Years ago, when I was in Oregon, we had a special area called the Mag Forest. Anybody with an unfilled deer tag could hunt on that property after the regular season was over. 4 weekends, this Saturday and Sunday. One year we took in 200 deer. So if you can actually increase the number of hunters when there's no place else to hunt, this is something to think about. How could you enhance the opportunity for people to hunt in the forested area. Did you raise your hand for a question? No. So providing a postseason, like I said, maybe in January, you're going to have the approval and the acceptance by New Hampshire Game and Fish, whether they want to do that or not. Another thought, possibility, is to arrange and manage for controlled deer drives. Deer drives are very effective in harvesting deer. You get a bunch of hunters on a line, they move through the forest, there's a bunch of hunters sort of at the back end, you drive the deer to them. It gets to be pretty effective, but it can be dangerous and it might not work on the forested area, the DMAP area. That was something you guys would have to work out. The bottom line is you have to commit to the long haul. Whatever you're doing, it's not a one-off. It has to be done every year from now on. And that's kind of a big challenge. Okay, let's shift gears just a little bit and go to the residential areas where deer are causing all kinds of problems inside home sites, well, on home sites. The second solution, adapting to the situation, is what's going on now. People protect their individual residential properties. They build the deer fence around the property. And you could reduce the number and density of small mammal carriers of deer ticks. This is addressing the tick problem, not the deer damage problem. Then, of course, you want to remind residents to drive slowly at night so they don't hit the darn deer. But importantly, to maintain a website or a blog to communicate with the residents regarding deer management. So they're all on the same page. They understand why it has to be done, how it's being done, and how it's working. When I and another associate went to Ward Pond Ridge that worked a workshop for them, I saw something I'd never seen before, which is home sites protected by fencing. All the homes that we saw had a 10-foot deer fence. These are people that can afford it. You have to have a gate that's a driveway that doesn't allow deer to come in. Some of them have these electric gates. The Glendoran people had a big electric gate. Or you can put these deer cattle guards on the entrance where the deer will not walk on those things because their hooves go down inside. So if you can have a cattle guard that's maybe 16 feet wide and 20 feet long, the deer won't go into the driveway. If you're going to build an exclusion fence, it's got to be 8 to 10 feet high. It has to have an apron at the bottom, 2 feet, so deer can't go under, and it has to have some kind of guard so cars can go in and out, but deer can't. You have to have access. And gates that people have to get out of the car, open and shut, that don't work. They leave the gates open. It's a problem. Now, fencing around individual home sites doesn't have to be woven wire. People have used these plastic fences with good effect. They just don't last them. You can exclude deer from your shrubs by putting netting over them. Like that burlap bag surrounding some kind of a shrub. What about ticks and diseases? Deer carry ticks on the properties. The ticks fall off, they end up on a mouse or a chipmunk. There's lots of them. They provide a blood meal. So now you've got a tick that's waiting for you to come by on the underside of vegetation and latch on. They have these things called tick toots that if you put them out around your property, they're cotton soaked with permethrin. The mice take the cotton back to their nesting site, build a bigger nest, and if they have any ticks on them, the permethrin kills the ticks. People make this stuff say it reduces the incidence by 90%. I think that's kind of a fairy tale, but they probably do help. You can reduce the density of small rodents. The left slide shows a bait station and the right slide shows it up. And basically these are weighted stations, have 5-pound weights, so a kid or a dog can't tip them over. There's an entrance and then there are cones of rodenticide sticking up at the deer, the mice can eat. And they work. If you go to any kind of a large facility, maybe a country club, you'll see these little black boxes. That's what they are. Or, in addition to that, you can live trap and remove mice and squirrels and chipmunks. One summer, when I had so many ticks, I removed 100 chipmunks from my property. That's on a half an acre. I didn't get another tick for a while. So, and the next year, there were hardly any chipmunks. So if you can remove them or poison them or do some way to get the number down, you're going to reduce your exposure to deer ticks. And deer tick life cycle is 2 years. So if they don't get good meals, if they don't reproduce that well, you're going to really cut the population down in the succeeding years. Lastly, how about reducing deer impact in residential areas by taking action to reduce deer density? One thing is you can exclude deer from residential areas by greatly reducing deer impact. You gotta actually harvest deer inside the areas that are causing the damage, because I don't think you get this transmission back and forth of deer. I think the deer that are causing damage in the residential areas are residents. They're there. You could build a giant drift fence, and people did this in Tennessee. They had this problem with wild hogs rooting up the greens and the fairways, and so they built a hog drift fence completely around the golf course. When I went to the manager and said, "Hey, how about building a deer fence all around the whole thing for us?" he just laughed me out of his office. We're talking millions of dollars. So a drift fence might be used, like it was for hogs, to keep deer from certain areas coming onto properties. But enclosing the area in deer fencing is prohibited. Now, what about reducing density in the affected landscapes? Well, you could also reduce deer in the adjacent forest. But those are two solutions that require harvesting deer. One in the surrounding area that keeps them from coming in, and one actually inside the area. I think you actually have to think about harvesting deer in those forested areas, those little islands inside residential areas. I don't think they go back outside into the forest. And you know, maintain a website or communications with residents so they know what's going on and what they might think about doing. Building a drift fence. This could be along the whole inside of that red area, keeping deer out. But $50,000 a mile, plus $5,000 for those little cattle guards. I think that's beyond the realm of possibilities. You have this horrible annual maintenance that's required, and you need to provide access points so people can actually go through on foot, perhaps to hunt. This is the hog damage. Talked about that. This is one of those cattle guards you really have to put to keep deer from getting inside a fence line. It's on a drift fence or even on a property. I was at the Biltmore Estate some years ago, and they have a forested area, and they had landscape with agriculture and cattle. They had a deer fence that separated the two, and they had one of these cattle guards in the road so people could drive in and out, and it worked. Last summer, we were in Michigan. I was looking at these cherry orchards. People have done the same thing. They built these 8-foot high deer fences, and at the entrance, instead of having a gate they have to open and close, they have cattle guard, and it seemed to work for them.
Do those work in the winter? How do
If
you
you have a
manage
lot of snow on them, probably not. So, yeah, that's a maintenance problem. If you do have a drift fence and you want people to have access, you have to cut a hole in it and then take another piece of the deer fence and hinge it so it can open and shut. And the open and shut is on the inside the fence so deer can't push their way through it. Last thing I want to talk about is this man. This is William Porter, who was probably the best deer researcher in the country. He was a bright fellow, all kinds of good ideas. And he worked with how to reduce deer impact on ecosystems. And he came up with this rose petal idea. Now, the rose petal idea builds on the fact that female deer have a pretty distinctive home range, and their offspring, female, have a home range that's very adjacent. So as you get increases in deer population, you get more circles, get a bigger area with deer high density. The idea is go into these small areas and eliminate all the deer with hunting. And they had research that showed that it worked. Now, there was a group in West Virginia of scientists that took this concept to a large forested area, and we're talking probably 10 or 20 square miles, and tried to eliminate deer from a central area. And they shot a lot of deer, but because there were so many deer in the surrounding areas, it didn't work. So they poo-pooed the rose petal solution. But I think there's real opportunity to try that in small areas, such as the interior of your residential area. The reason for the rose petal hypothesis working is that those live in these matriarchal family groups, all females, low dispersal rates. They're not going to go and seek out another area unless they're pressed by weather or food. Overlapping home ranges of the offspring create these pattern of like petals. And so the rose petal theory is you take away the petals and eventually you have no deer. But it requires the removal of family members of deer from a small area. I don't think it's going to work in a large area, but you take these residential areas, and this does have a potential for working. What are the problems? And people have identified these with the rose petal approach. In areas with high deer density in suburban areas, deer dispersal rates may be higher than thought. So the rose petal idea might not work that well. Attempts to replicate the results in high density areas failed. This is this West Virginia experiment, but I don't think they tried them on small areas. And the effectiveness might depend, like they say, on the ecological contact of the area. And usually it's better, they said, use in areas with low deer density.
How small is a small area?
I would say 20 acres, 30 acres. And the people in West Virginia were trying to plant hundreds of acres. But these are proactive actions you can take to reduce deer within residential areas. You can establish, and you already have it, a coordinated committee, all stakeholders, including representatives from Dartmouth, because there could be a research aspect of this. Develop and maintain a website that goes to all stakeholders and monitor deer impact and condition intensity. And then develop a system where landowners, not outside hunters, actually harvest the deer. And this is kind of like, I could get booed off the stage for this, but the people that are being impacted can be trained and taught, and they can be used to reduce deer density inside these areas. So you might recruit individual landowners as harvesters, but you have to have coordination, communication, and acceptance by the New Hampshire Game and Fish. And they might not go for that. You need to educate and train landowners as deer harvesters for hunting. You have to develop a system of deer stands where hunters are assigned to them, where they can go up and harvest deer, possibly with a crossbow. It's very accurate. This is what worked on the Wardtown Ridge Reservation. People were assigned to deer stand. That's where they went. And then here's a part of the system, Barb's, that develop a system for butchering harvested deer and then distributing it to needy persons. Raise the point, who's gonna shoot more than 2 deer a year? Very few people. You would. Bravo. I have a deer from a door prize. Most people don't. So you have to come up with a system for getting rid or using the harvested meat. If a person goes out, and one of my neighbors did this, he would harvest 4 or 5 deer a year, but he knew where he could take the butcher carcasses and give the meat away. So he had a system that said, it's okay to shoot this many deer. In fact, it's mandatory, but here's what we'll do with those deer, so you don't have to worry about how am I going to eat 5 deer in a year. Again, this requires establishing and maintaining a communication system so that the harvesters are informed, they're trained, and other stakeholders are aware of this and accept it. Can't read the session. What's critical for this kind of a system is monitoring to determine whether deer move in and out of these areas. So that would justify harvesting and hunting in the areas. If the deer are staying there, if they're residents, harvesting deer in the adjacent forested area is not going to work. The only way we can determine this is to have a study set up where you radio collar deer inside residential areas, outside the forest, and track, see where they go. That would really help justify harvesting deer inside these areas if they don't move, if they stay put. You need buy-in from all stakeholders, including Dr. Collins, who might provide some kind of research, New Hampshire Game and Fish, and all the landowners. So you got to have an effective communication system to include the use of blogs or websites, Facebook. You have to develop a system for training and retaining volunteer hunters. You have to have a process for obtaining funding, get training materials, possibly harvesting cup, like crossroads for people. And you must develop a monitoring system to report our success and develop options for the future. So I'm done. Good luck. You're going to need a lot of pluck. You're going to need some luck. You have to be steadfast. You have to have commitment for long term. Stakeholders must support and become involved. You have to have the participation of landowners. Must be inclusive. All stakeholders must be involved in the information and planning and decision making. And that includes buy-in. So I'm done. I'll handle any questions. And there's a very short raffle coming up to kind of hold you. Anybody got any questions? And be aware that I lost most of my hearing in Vietnam, so I'll try to hear what you're saying.
Yes, I have been exploring the idea of fencing portions of my property. But my concern is that the existing fencing, whether it's woven wire or plastic mesh, excludes everything else. I don't want to exclude all other animals from crossing over onto my property because
Okay,
that doesn't seem like a biodiversity solution. Or,
Right.
So are you aware of fencing that excludes deer but allows other kinds of animals through?
Yeah. Yeah. There are standard livestock fencing. Squares are about that big. And you'd be amazed at how big an animal can go through a space like that.
So it would be 6 by 6 or 4 by
About 6 by 4.
6.
Fox, possum, raccoons, which you might not care for. Mice, which but yeah, fences can be such that they do not include small mammals. Bears can climb over. That's an issue.
Right.
Someone else had a question.
Have you had an experience in extending the deer season and increasing deer kill? I mean,
Yeah, that's what I
election
talked about.
season, you
Um,
have more.
Some states have special damage deer hunts where you can hunt in special identified areas in later seasons. The situation on Mag Fork, where we had 4 weekends of hunting, it was after the regular season. Anybody with an unused antlerless tag could come and harvest a deer. I don't recommend that here, but it really increased our harvest. Helped a lot. You can do it, but it has to be outside the realm of normal hunting. It has to be an attractive place for people who haven't shot a deer to go get one.
Why would you not recommend it here?
Hmm?
Why would you not recommend it here?
Why do I not recommend it here?
Yeah, you just said you wouldn't recommend it here.
Did I say that?
You did.
I think you
I was
did.
afraid of that. I would recommend it
I
here.
would. Okay.
You got a question?
I was wondering if you've worked with Dartmouth out on their wild lands, because they own a large,
Right.
like 5% of the state of New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Do they allow you to go out and research their property that's
I don't know
supposedly?
about hunting or research. I will say this. Dartmouth is a liberal college. And I think they reward their researchers for doing basic research.
Mhm.
We're talking about applied research, where you have a problem and you try and solve it rather than try and understand the nuts and bolts of
Okay,
why it's there. The Dartmouth and Alumni Magazine had an article about 2 years ago about the forest. And they were concerned about global warming having an impact. And so I wrote to them and said, yeah, global warming is important. What about the deer? I don't think they even thought about the deer as an influencer of the conditions on the forest. I don't know if that got their attention. Who knows? Well said.
We have a question from Zoom.
Oh,
Someone says, you mentioned homeowner buy-in. Can we put a dollar figure on that? How much money do you think we would need to develop and maintain the increased hunting scheme you recommend?
oh.
Let's see if Hanover homeowners would pony up.
Well, to actually do the hunting doesn't require a whole lot of money. It just requires building a communication system. Unless you want to put up a deer fence and a drift fence, that's expensive. But just simply communicating with people and increasing the availability of hunting. You might have some costs involved with maybe erecting deer stands or keeping track of the hunters. But in our case, with the KPDC, all the landowners contributed to an annual budget. And I think the annual budget was $20,000. That paid my salary and all the incidental stuff. So I don't think the costs are high unless they build a deer fence, and then it's right to the roof. Yes.
how do you get some stakeholders who are not inclined to buy in to do so? Because, for instance, in Hanover, where there are a lot of deer, the college owns a lot of property. They won't let any hunting be done on their property. And there's Pine Park, and they've decided that it's not practicable to let hunting go on their property. So there are lots of areas with deer, but the stakeholders won't allow hunting in the area.
Right. So things like this, we try and communicate to the public. How many landowners are here who object? I don't know. But it's not to say it can't be done. You just have to, I'm not going to say go out and have a protest. Protest to the college, hey, you're killing us. Why don't you give us some help? But expanding your sphere of influence and communication is important. I wrote this article for the Forest Landowners and Managers. I don't know if that helped. But if you go to the administration, and enough people complain publicly, it's a whole matter of pressure. You see all these protests now that are going on. I think they're having some kind of an effect. At least they're galvanizing people to do something. So establishing a communication system is very important, and making sure people get their message to people who may not be willing to receive it, like the Dartmouth administration, like some landowners. I think that's the trick. It's just getting information to people and making some kind of fuss about not doing something. Good luck. Another question?
I put deer off all over my flower gardens in the summertime. It keeps the deer off, but I know we can't.
What did you put on
Deer off.
Oh, deer
The
off.
spray.
It's a liquid fence, yeah.
Yeah, liquid fence.
It works.
You have to do it at least every month and a half. or
Every
2
time it
months.
rains.
Every
No,
time.
Every time.
No, longer than that. Anyway,
I think that's
my flowers have always
effective
been
on small
survived.
properties. for small things, but doesn't do much for deer tick problem, doesn't do
Right,
much for the
right.
car
The
collision
trees.
Right.
problem, or, you know,
Yeah.
deer impact on other places that don't use deer off.
Half and
Doesn't
half
always work.
works.
Hmm?
Buy half and half in the grocery store. Mix it, 50% half and half,
Cream?
50% water. Yeah,
Cream?
yeah.
Okay.
50% water, 50% half and half. It sticks better to the plants. The animals hate the animal smell.
Mhm.
It's cheaper than deer off, lasts longer.
Interesting.
Half and half and water. You just buy a quart of half and half in the co-op, wherever you buy it.
That'll probably combat powdery mildew too.
It probably, and then mix it 50-50 in a thing, spray it around. It's quite fun doing it anyway. and it,
Plants all turn white.
no, actually, my wife, no, they don't.
Okay.
You have huge amounts on. And after it, and it smells a lot. The deer off stuff smells absolutely disgusting. And it's quite much more expensive. This is cheaper and lasts longer, and it does work through rainstorms. So do try it. Do try it.
Interesting.
There you go.
There you go. But it doesn't work as well as shooting.
Good for the dairy.
You said that before deer season, you went out and estimated the deer population.
Right.
How actually do you count the number of deer per acre, per square mile?
How?
Yeah,
Well, we have transects that are a mile long. There are plots within each transect, 100 feet apart. In the plots, we count the number of deer pellets. We count the deer impact on a selected number of tree seedlings. Those that are highly preferred, those that are ho-hum, and those that they avoid.
but you're not counting the deer, you're counting evidence.
Yeah.
of deer.
We never see it, well, rarely
Yeah,
see a deer.
Okay.
Yeah.
We just see their poop that stays on the ground. That's how we do that.
So how did you then decide that that was 35? Somebody must have counted the deer at one
If you take the number of pellet groups poop out by deer on average, it's
Oh, you just know.
15 a day. They know that.
See,
So if you count all the pellets
Yeah.
and you divide it by 50, then you know how many deer days. And then if you have the area in miles,
Yeah.
you can do it.
Mhm.
And, you know, like I said, maybe I didn't say,
15.
there was an outfit that actually flew parts of the KQDC with an airplane. It did these aerial counts and count the deer in the winter with the snow. And we counted something like, let's say, 40, and they counted 30. They were off by 10. We went to this Glendorn place that was enclosed, and we had a deer drive where we had a line forcing the deer. We counted all the deer, and the difference between the number of deer counted and the number of deer estimated by the pellet group counts was one deer.
Wow.
75 versus 76, I forget which way it was. But we did that twice. We did it in 1990 and 2000. We got the same result. So I feel very confident about the pellet group count. Most people don't like it. It was developed 75 years ago, and it's not esoteric. And they're not using drones, you said drones, or other things to count the deer. So it's not high tech, but it works.
15 a day.
Hmm?
15 a day. 1-5.
15 pellet groups a day. Some people in Georgia estimated that. And it's like, well, this is Georgia, but they're the same deer. And like I said, we used the estimates that we got using 15, and we compared those with the count of deer.
Good. Yeah, well done. Yeah, okay, right.
So-
That's
so
a useful statistic. 15.
We've done that forever. And it really
Yeah, not
shows how
15
deer go up and down.
Sure.
Okay, so now I get to give away some things.
Can I make a couple comment about two natural areas here? Some that were brought up, Pond Park and the Trescott Water Company land. I'm the park steward at Pond Park. I'm out there almost every day. The issue with the deer hunting there, 100 acres, if you close all of Pond Park, it's really one of safety. There are thousands of people within walking distance of Pond Park. If you look at all the neighborhoods around Pond Park and the college, which has thousands of people, it's a safety issue. How do you close off an area that has 5 entrances encompassing from the fire station to Rope Ferry Road. And it's really one of safety. How would you close the whole park for hunting season or as a part of that? Yes,
Can I
ma'am.
make a comment? You know, a lot of areas that are worried about safety, I mean, there is a possibility if you wanted to be part of the DMAP program in Pine Park that you could limit it to archery hunting. You could even limit it to archery hunting from tree stands only. That's, you know, a method that's used in a lot of suburban, urban areas. That's quite safe. You know, people are shooting from elevated tree stands.
That was the approach that they used in Wardtown Ridge and the Mianas River Gap area. Bow hunting only.
Yeah.
From elevated stands.
Balch Hill has used that in the past.
And the theory from an elevated stand is that therefore you're shooting downwards so that the
Right,
chance
you're
of.
shooting down instead of across.
Indeed, and if it's just bow hunting, then it would be a great.
You could do it with a rifle, or you could do it with
Yeah.
a crossbow.
Yeah.
It's still you're
Yeah.
shooting down
Yeah.
instead of
Yeah.
across.
I understand, and I think it does work in certain areas like at Balch Hill. It's been used there.
Mhm.
Can you distinguish Pine Park from Balch Hill?
Numbers of people.
But there must be bits of Pine Park which are away from the paths. You know, in the sort of central bits, which actually would be safe. They're obviously the paths all over the place.
I mean, there's a trail network throughout the entire park.
There is.
That's the same as Balch Hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
It probably is, there are more users of Pine Park than there are at Balch Hill.
I'm sure that's right.
Significantly more. I mean, I personally see hundreds of people a day.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm the park steward. I don't make the rules and enforce it. There's a group of trustees who do that. And it would take convincing them of
Right.
this kind of an activity there.
It's a minor thing, but just one other thing I've seen in areas where that's a concern is like some parks will have at the kiosk like little orange vests that people can borrow, you know, when they're walking. But I mean, archery hunting definitely it coexists with other uses in a lot of places.
Yeah.
It can be successful.
We do have, the other property is the Triscott Water Company land, which they do put the orange vests out at two locations, two main entrances there. And for the first time this year, they're going to close one entrance during rifle season.
Yeah.
It'll be a self-enforced restriction. There's not going to be, you know, a guard at the gate, but there will be signage closing the Trescott entrance in that lower section of the water company land. You can still go in from the Dogford roadside, but it'll be the first time that they've had this policy, and be interesting to see the feedback.
Why? I don't understand why they're doing
The areas over the last 10 years that have been developed in the water company land, as the trail networks there, have encroached in the popular deer hunting areas. And one of those is that southern area. And the idea is that close it, restrict hunting in that lower area, which gives the deer hunters a popular, useful place to go.
keep the public from walking there so the hunters have better access.
Yes,
Got
yes.
Keep the hunters and dogs. Dogs are a big thing because their dogs are running loose in that area too and scaring deer. When you close it for hunters, for the general population and
The
dogs.
closing is not of deer hunters. Maybe I didn't say
Yeah,
that
yeah,
clear.
yeah.
The closing is not from deer. The closing is from recreational users,
Yeah.
mountain bikers and hikers, dog walkers, you know, that sort of thing. It's to encourage the hunters, to give the hunters an appropriate place, a popular place. When by popular, I mean that's where the deer are. Because the other trail networks further up the hill and over Dogford that have been developed have encroached on the adequate deer hunting locations. So
What's the legal restrictions on use of firearms and use of bows next to roads and buildings?
Use of firearms and use of,
Yeah,
what was the second thing?
crossbows.
Oh, bows.
Yeah.
So firearms, I printed this out so that I say it correctly. So firearms can't be discharged within a compact area of any town or city. And that has kind of a complicated definition, which is a contiguous area containing 6 or more buildings used as part-time or permanent dwellings, where each is within 300 feet of the other. So anyways,
Okay.
basically a
Yeah.
dense area.
Okay, right.
So you can't use firearms in those
So we
areas.
can't, we've not used firearms.
Yeah,
in ours.
but you can use bows.
And what are the rules on bows?
So bows, they can't be used within 300 feet of an occupied dwelling unless you have permission from that.
From that particular
homeowner.
dwelling?
Yes,
So 300 feet,
300 feet. But if you have permission, you can use it.
right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And this would be ducks, not deer, but there are hunters who use guns on the Connecticut River to hunt ducks,
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah.
So that it doesn't matter as long as it's
That's not,
Too close.
100 yards away if they're discharging fire.
got it. Thank you.
yeah. Okay, thank you, yeah. So it's 100 yards from any house, basically. And, but if you've got the homeowner's permission, then you're okay. Thank you very much.
As long as you're not, for guns, you can't be in a compact
No,
area.
I'm on the
Yeah.
crossbows now. I'm on the
Okay,
crossbows.
yeah, crossbows, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, Brandon.
Hey, David, you're a Vietnam vet. We, basically use body count as a way of determining success in the Vietnam War. That didn't work.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, so body count, remember body count?
Oh, yes.
So I'm asking whether body count is an effective way to actually measure the success of these programs, because that seems to be the major criteria. You know, how many deer you kill.
If you bring deer to a check station, you record them. I think some states require all hunters to report a harvest, sort of like body count. But that's a way of trying to see if you've reduced the population, but you miss animals that were shot. The best thing is to do an assessment with a pellet group count. That tells you how many you actually have, how many survived over winter, and how many survived from hunting. Better than the body count.
Okay.
It's one term in the equation, John, and that's the one you can actually know versus counting pellets, right? That's an estimate.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah.